Imagine you're standing in a room that's growing quieter by the second. It's not because the people inside are gone, but because your voice has slowly been swallowed by their need to interpret it. You've explained yourself once, twice, a third time, and still the glint in their eyes doesn't change. It's not understanding they're waiting for, it's conformity, approval, proof. You feel it, don't you? That invisible tension, like you owe them something, like if you just found the right words, you might finally be seen correctly. But what if there are no right words? What if every explanation you give is a brick in the prison of perception others have built for you? Every attempt to clarify becomes another surrender, another negotiation of your identity, traded piece by piece for a comfort you never really asked for. And yet, you keep speaking. Why? Silence feels dangerous, and being misunderstood feels like death. Because if someone sees you wrong, it must mean you are wrong, right? Now pause. What if you've got it all backwards? What if clarity doesn't come from explaining, but from not explaining? What if silence, far from being passive or cowardly, is the sharpest blade you have? What if silence is where your power lives, and it refuses to negotiate your truth for the comfort of others? Think about how often you dilute yourself to appear agreeable, explain your decisions to justify their discomfort, or share intimate thoughts just to prove you're not cold. You shape-shift with words, afraid of being seen as harsh, distant, arrogant. But in doing so, you vanish. You become fog. So ask yourself, who are you without the apology? Who are you when you stop adjusting your frequency just to be better received? And more terrifyingly, why do you still believe you need to be received at all? You say you want to be understood, but do you? Or do you just want to be approved of? Understanding doesn't always come with comfort. Sometimes, when people finally see you clearly, they don't applaud, they recoil. We believe explaining brings clarity. In reality, it often muddies the water. We believe silence will isolate us. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us whole. What if every time you explain yourself, you become less of who you are and more of what they want you to be? Why does it hurt so much to be misunderstood? Why does silence feel like abandonment and explaining feel like survival? To answer that, you have to go back to the architecture of your mind, and even further, to the scaffolding of civilization itself. The compulsion to explain isn't just a habit, it's a survival mechanism rooted in our deepest psychological and philosophical anxieties. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. What he didn't say, at least not directly, is that the process of becoming yourself often means confronting the terror of not being accepted. From our earliest memories, we are trained to perform for approval. As children, approval equals safety. To be understood is to be loved. To be misunderstood is to be punished, excluded, rejected. This fear calcifies over time. You learn to edit yourself in real time, rehearsing conversations in your mind before they're spoken. You become fluent in self-erasure. You don't speak to express, but to protect, to manage perceptions, to preempt judgment. You explain not because you owe anyone anything, but because your nervous system has been wired to see misunderstanding as a threat to your very existence. And here's where philosophy sharpens the edge. Friedrich Nietzsche challenged the entire moral structure of Western society when he declared, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." He understood what modern psychology has only just begun to map, that the raw self, the unedited soul, is almost always too much for the world. So we cover it, we explain it, we soften the angles. Not for others, really, but to avoid the painful mirror of their reactions. And what does that do over time? It splits you, it fractures identity. Arthur Schopenhauer called this the tragedy of consciousness, the moment you realize that your inner world is unknowable to others, and that your attempts to bridge that gap with language often create more distortion than understanding. Yet you keep trying. You've mistaken clarity for connection. You've been sold the illusion that if someone truly understood you, they'd never leave, never judge, never turn their back. But that's a lie. Jean-Paul Sartre reminded us that hell is other people, because they insist on defining you from the outside. The gaze of others becomes a trap, and the more you try to clarify yourself within that gaze, the tighter the trap becomes. So here you are, desperately offering words as lifelines, trying to make the picture clearer, but the image they see was never yours to control. The problem isn't that you're misunderstood. The problem is that you think being understood is proof that you exist. And until you unhook from that illusion, you'll keep sacrificing pieces of yourself on the altar of explanation, hoping that one day someone will see the whole without demanding you translate it first. When you live in a world that demands explanation, your silence becomes rebellion. But long before you rebel, you comply. And you pay a price you don't even realize you're paying. It begins subtly. You start curating your truth, filtering your emotions, saying not what you feel, but what is easiest to digest. You become fluent in self-translation, reducing the complexity of your soul into acceptable sound bites. You explain away your boundaries. You justify your intuition. You over-clarify your choices, as if living your life requires a permission slip signed by everyone else. It's a performance. And the audience, they're not listening to understand. They're listening to approve. Here lies the cruelest irony. In your attempt to be understood, you become more misunderstood, because they don't see you, but a diluted, carefully curated version of you. You stop being a person and become a story others tell themselves about you, a story you helped write through all your explanations. It's neurological. Your brain is constantly seeking coherence and narrative clarity. When you explain yourself repeatedly, you train your brain to need that external feedback to regulate your self-worth. This is called externalized validation circuitry. It's a loop. You speak to be understood, feel a hit of approval, then crave more. Like a dopamine slot machine, every nod of agreement reinforces the belief that your existence must be translated, justified, approved of. Cognitive dissonance kicks in when others disagree. Their misunderstanding feels like a threat to your identity. So you explain again. You get stuck in the echo chamber of justification always, one more sentence away from being fully seen, but never quite arriving. There's a darker cost. You begin to distrust your own knowing. When your truth is constantly met with requests for clarification, you start wondering if maybe you do owe the world an explanation. Maybe your anger was too sharp, your joy too loud, your no too final. Slowly, the edges of your authenticity wear down, not through confrontation, but through conversation. This is how people disappear while still speaking. And society rewards it. You're praised for being open, transparent, communicative. But no one tells you that sometimes silence is the loudest declaration of self-respect. No one warns you that being endlessly explainable makes you infinitely alterable. The more you explain, the more you train the world to believe it deserves access. The more you explain, the more you convince yourself that you are too complicated to simply be. And the tragedy is this. The silence you fear is not the enemy. It's the only place you are still whole. But we're not taught to value wholeness. We're taught to be understood. So you stand there over-articulated, underheard wondering why no one sees the real you. The reason is simple. You never gave them silence long enough to meet you there. What happens when you stop explaining? At first, chaos, resistance, withdrawal. People ask what's wrong. They probe. They push. They squirm in the void your silence creates. They say you're being distant, cold, arrogant, unfair. But what they're really saying is, your silence is forcing me to sit with my own projections, and I don't like what I see. This is the first act of rebellion, holding your silence long enough for others to reveal themselves. The world is addicted to noise because silence forces reflection. It strips away the narratives and reveals the raw discomfort underneath. When you no longer play the game of constant explanation, people panic. You've become unclear. They've lost control of the story. Let them. This is your liberation. Rebellion begins the moment you realize that being misunderstood is not a crisis, it's a mirror. It reflects the limits of their perception, not the limits of your being. And sometimes, not correcting them is the highest form of self-respect. Look to those who walked this path before you. Franz Kafka, who once wrote, "I am silent and I observe." His silence wasn't weakness. It was his resistance to a world obsessed with superficial clarity. He knew that to preserve the essence of the self, one must often hide it in plain sight. Or think of Friedrich Nietzsche, who spoke in riddles, paradoxes, and aphorisms, because he knew the most dangerous truths cannot be spoon-fed. They must be discovered. He let the silence between his words challenge you. He left space for your discomfort. This is your task now, not to explain yourself into acceptance, but to withhold yourself into integrity. You must learn to say "laissez mean more." To walk away when someone demands explanation. To protect your truth not with words, but with boundaries. Because silence isn't passive, it's a scalpel, a weapon, a sacred violence that cuts through the noise and exposes the real. It says, "I do not owe you an entry into my soul, just because you feel entitled to it." And yes, some will leave. Some will walk away, offended by your refusal to shrink. Let them go. Because the ones who remain without needing the commentary, those who can sit in the silence with you, unafraid are the ones who see you without distortion. More importantly, you will begin to see yourself. Not as a reflection of other people's comfort, but as an original, untranslatable truth. So here is your revolt. Withdraw your explanations. Withhold your clarifications. Let your silence speak a language only the soul understands. This isn't cruelty. This is sovereignty. The moment you stop performing clarity, you become clarity. Because silence doesn't confuse. It reveals. And in the stillness that follows, something extraordinary happens. You hear a voice you forgot belonged to you. Yours. Unfiltered, unapologetic, unexplained. There is a silence so powerful. It doesn't just resist the world, it remakes it. You finally arrive there when you stop explaining, stop rehearsing your worth, stop asking to be seen. You appear, not as a concept, not as an interpretation, but as a presence. Here's the truth you were never told. You were never meant to be understood. Not completely, not cleanly, not without distortion. You are a mystery, even to yourself, a living contradiction, a fluid constellation of memories, instincts, wounds, and dreams that no language can fully hold. And any attempt to compress that into clarity will always betray the sacred complexity of your being. You are not a sentence to be clarified, you are a poem to be experienced. And poems don't explain themselves. They exist. Silence, then, is not absence. It is the purest form of presence. It is the moment you stop bending your shape to fit into containers built by others. It is the space in which your soul breathes without interruption. In this silence, you realize something world-shattering. The need to be understood is not the same as the need to be known. To be understood is to be dissected, boxed, labeled. To be known is to be felt, witnessed, held in paradox. And only silence makes that knowing possible. Words are tools, but they are also walls. They shape, but they also shield. They illuminate, but they also blind. And for every word you offer to bridge the distance, there is another part of you that slips through the cracks. So you stop, not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but because you understand now. True clarity comes not when others finally grasp you, but when you no longer require them to. It's in the unspoken nod between souls who trust the quiet. It's in the pause after a deep truth lands like thunder and nothing else needs to be said. It's in your refusal to water yourself down for legibility. And in that refusal, you become luminous. The world may not know what to do with your silence, but the right ones will recognize it. Because real recognition doesn't ask for footnotes. It doesn't dissect your silence looking for a flaw. It sits beside it, reverent and curious, knowing that what lives there is something deeper than words of presence that cannot be possessed, only honored. So now, you walk differently. You speak less, but say more. You know who you are, even when others don't. You no longer explain the flame. You become the fire, and you let your silence blaze its own truth. Wild, untranslatable, free,